Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for another episode of Wuxia Workshop. And today we're going to be talking about Golden Swallow, a 1968 film directed by Chang Cheh, starring Cheng Pei-pei, Lieh, and Jimmy Wang Yu. This is the sequel to Come Drink With Me, which we all discussed, what was it, like a week or two ago, Joel?
Yeah, it was previously. It was the last episode.
So we're following up. I should tell people, even though it's a sequel, it's by a different director. The first film was directed by King Hu, and this one has a sharply different storyline. It doesn't feel like a typical sequel, and we're going to get into that as we discuss it. But before we do, I just wanted to get Joel's response to the film, because this was your first time seeing it, and I know I've talked about it before, so people probably kind of already know my opinion. But why don't you tell people what you thought about the movie and what your reaction to it was?
It was a mixed bag. There's elements in this movie that I think distinguish it in really good ways, and there's also a lot of elements that distinguish it in annoying ways. And for me, it was almost a wash, because the stuff I liked about it, I genuinely enjoyed about it. Like, there's a great use of shaky cam a lot, like these handhelds in action scenes, that contrast really strongly with the much more deliberate, more broad, kind of Kubrick-esque, like you said, view of combat scenes that we saw in Come Drink With Me. But that's a good distinguishment, because it feels different, and the fights feel frantic and desperate, and you don't really lose much information as far as, like, you know, who's fighting who, or who's winning or losing, where the injuries are. So that's a good way it distinguished itself. There's no one really big letdown in the casting anywhere, which is nice. I think some characters are underutilized, and I think we're going to get into that later on. But there's no one character that's presence should be there that isn't there, like we had with one of the main villains in the previous movie. So that's good. Another thing that is a strong positive for it. But there's a lot of stuff in it that I just directing choice and choice of emphasis in, like, who gets to be a central character, how people interact with each other. The whole arc of the Golden Swallow character was a problem for me in this movie, and in a movie named after her, that's a significant drawback. There's also a few things that are a little uneven about it, like the use of violence in this movie. Most of it is really good. Like, for the most part, it's really brutal and has a strong impact that kind of communicates to you how serious and savage this violence is. And sometimes it's almost goofy.
It slips into comedy accidentally.
Yeah, and that's not. You don't want that. You don't want to accidentally Ed Wood yourself, and they do a few times.
The goose scene and the scene where the guy flies up in the air and lands down, I think, is probably the scene. The other one.
Forgot about that scene. Okay, yeah, that was dumb.
So I think we should talk about those things at the start. But I'll give my reaction just to sort of so we can have the full spectrum. So it's funny. I had kind of a similar reaction, but I would frame it totally differently than you. So I have the same sort of feeling of, I went in when I first saw this movie. It was after I'd seen Come Drink With Me, and I was all excited to see Golden Swallow's next adventure. And to my dismay, this was obviously not a movie about Golden Swallow. This was about Silver Rock, and Golden Swallow was a very peripheral character in a lot of respects. Now, that was disappointing. However, rather than sort of have it be a wash, the way that it dealt with Silver Rock and the direction and just how shockingly violent it was at times, and how like the fight, especially the finale, but all through the film, and the way that the Silver Rock character is handled, just sort of what he represents, all of that was, to me, a great film in its own right. And so it was sort of, the way I saw it was a great film that was made at the expense of the sequel that he was making. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like,
I think that's a good way to characterize it, too.
Yeah, I would give it a 5. I would give it a 5 out of 5, but I have to sort of explain the 5, because it's definitely, if you're going in saying, I really want to see Golden Swallow, that's not what this movie is. This movie, the Golden Swallow thing, is an excuse for Chang Cheh to make the Silver Rock movie. Do you know what I mean?
Because there's no brand recognition for the rampage of Silver Rock, which is what the movie should really have been called.
Yeah.
Or Silver Rock's Revenge would have been perfect.
Well, you know what the name of the movie it's more commonly known as the girl with the thunderbolt kick, which is even weirder because it doesn't make any sense. I don't even
First
remember
of all,
if we see
he has
her
a
kick.
jump attack, and he's a guy, and there's no girl with thunderbolt. There's no thunderbolt kick attack, and what?
It's an odd thing. It's an odd thing. I mean, and also the way that so Golden Swallow is the main protagonist in Come Drink With Me. Now, granted, there's also Drunken Cat, who plays a really big role as well, so it's not like it's just about her. But
he is what they call a deuteragonist. He is also a protagonist, but he's not the only one. He kind of shares the limelight a little.
And
I would say the movie hands the baton to him, because he winds up carrying it to the end.
Yeah. But this is the movie that's supposed to be about her, and so... but she takes even more of a backseat, and she's a totally different character, right? Like wouldn't you say that? Like if the character that we saw in Come Drink With Me was a very sort of I'm all about the business at hand type of person. I don't imagine her swooning over a man easily. Do you know what I mean? It does not seem to be part of her personality in the first film, and in this one, and also in that one. She's never made to, like, she's a pretty woman. The actress who plays her is incredibly pretty, but she's never like dolled up at all in the first.
Oh yeah, they really doll her up in this one.
Yeah, so
like she has some very obvious makeup on.
No, and what's interesting is in the first movie there are a couple of scenes where she has to, like, there's one scene where she dresses up like a lady to go to the temple, and it's surprising how beautiful she looks in that scene because she's been dressed as a man the whole time, right? And the other scenes where you sort of see her femininity come through, it's accidental. Do you know what I mean? Like the scene where she's poisoned. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like you see her vulnerable side, but it's not like she's depicted the way she is in the Golden Swallow film, where she's really dressed to the nines and her hair is all done up and all this stuff. You know, it just felt like a totally different presentation of the character.
It did, and that's one of the. I think that has to do with one of the most annoying elements in my estimation, which is that every character is secondary to Silver Rock. Every character revolves around him. He is really a terrible example of a Mary Sue because, like, the movie, like it. At first, it's not noticeable. You just think he's a badass because we see a lot of that. We see like the mysterious badass character a lot in Wuxia, but he's definitely a vehicle for like the vanity of whoever wrote him. He's clearly a Mary Sue because everything every other character wants revolves around him. Every interaction that they have, he gets mentioned even when he's not there. It gets to the point that at the end of the movie, I was actually really happy that he died, and I was mad because I didn't get to see him die because it fades out on him standing there heroically, not being dead yet, and fades into his grave, and I'm like, oh my God! Give me the Satisfaction movie.
I don't know if I'm not 100% clear on what the parameters of a Mary Sue are, like what technically qualifies. I don't know that I would agree that he's a Mary Sue, but if I did agree, like let's just say for the sake of argument that he is, just to skip that
rhetorically speaking, he's a rhetorical Mary Sue.
I don't think I would mind. I like what I got with him because I feel like he's a common trope that you see in a lot of Hong Kong and mainland China movies where you have this hero who's just hell-bent on the path that he's on, and it's going to lead to his destruction. And that's kind of the point of the movie. It's kind of like a rebel without a cause type situation. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's very sort of, I don't know, it's sort of plucked right out of a Western or something. Do you know what I mean? It's got that kind of a...
It does have that. But, like, I think the success of a character like that, like say what I might call a Clint Eastwood character or a John Wayne kind of character, which I think you're right. There's some tissue that connects them. I think the success of them is your ability as a member of the audience to put your feet in their boots and kind of become them through the movie.
Yeah.
But those characters, very importantly, they mess up and they fail and get beaten once in a while, and that basically never happens to Silver Rock. The thing that makes him fail for me as something that can be a vehicle for my own power fantasy is that he doesn't really ever struggle. Ever. Even when he's being torn apart and dying, he doesn't really seem to be struggling. He still wins handily.
Well, yeah, but that's because he's like a Lancelot type character. He's the supreme swordsman who doesn't really have a rival. Do you know what I mean? That's his tragedy in the movie. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing Yeah, I think so. I think that's the thing. Well, it's the thing that brings him to the grim end that he meets. Do you know what I mean? Because you're right, he doesn't really struggle throughout there's no real. I mean, there's some internal struggle. Obviously, he has some kind of internal thing going on that's eating him alive. But in terms of martial rivals, there isn't really anybody. The only time we see him struggle is when he's mortally wounded and vulnerable
and totally overwhelmed. Yeah.
So, but for I don't know. I think you're right. I think your assessment's right. He doesn't struggle. I don't know that that's necessarily an issue for me with this movie, because I'm trying to think. Well, what would it have been like if he had struggled? And I don't know that would have been. I don't know what that would have added to the movie for me.
It would have added pathos to it, is what it would have added. If I got to see him, like, because he has a scene which is really important, and like I don't want to like wreck our sequence of talking about this movie, but importantly to that character, he has a scene where he talks about how his family was basically killed in front of him, and no hero stepped forward to save him.
Yeah,
that was a scene that could have built pathos, especially if we'd seen it, and then the subsequent training that we're also told about but not shown by Gold Swallow in her new role as the #1 fangirl of Silver Rock. It's that reduction of all the other characters to make him better that frustrates me about the structure of the movie. It's the taking of that, like, that's the issue that I have with it.
Okay, I can see that. See, my take on the character is, in terms of martial abilities, there's nothing can touch him. Like, that's not a problem for him. His problem lies in love and places like that. Do you know what I mean? That's where that's sort of the. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's got this whole thing with Golden Swallow, and that's sort of the.
But think about it from if you were Silver Rock, the first thing you see after he kills those dudes on the road is he's standing over Golden Swallow's hut where her friends are. What kept him from the movie? From what we got from the movie, what kept him from just walking down there and saying, "Hey, remember me? I kept your pin for years. You want to go get tea? Come drink with me." What stopped him from doing that?
Because he's a manly man. That's why he's like
What he does instead is he goes on a quest to frame her for murdering huge amounts of bad guys, so that she'll get attacked, and then she'll have to come see him. And then when she does, his motivation doesn't make any sense to me.
He's messed up in the head. That's what I'm getting at. That's the compelling thing about the character. He can't walk up to her and talk to her. He's got to enact this whole carnage-ridden plot to attract her attention. Do you know what I mean?
He's like he has to challenge her friend to a duel because he can't explain himself very well. I just there's just so because here's the thing that does for me again though, Brennan, is that okay? So what you're saying is the only villain that's good enough to really get in the way of Silver Rock is Silver Rock.
Yes. Yeah.
I hate that. I hate that so much because he can never self-actualize.
Well, he's not, but he that's not the point of the character. The character is meant to implode. Do you know what I mean? That's how I read it. I read it like he's like that end scene, right? He's crucified in the final moments of the movie, right? That's the only end that this character can meet. It's not about him reconciling himself with anything, or coming to terms with the concept, or growing as an individual. Do you know what I mean? That's his destiny is to die as the supreme swordsman. You know, that's the it's.
I mean, I think that my problem is that I do not understand the appeal of that because I just want to slap the guy.
Okay, well, I mean, it's like
that might be that. Maybe it wouldn't have been so frustrating if, first of all, if that element had been brought forward a little bit more, but also if every other character wasn't swooning over him, I would have liked that more. Like if they called him out on what a dickhead he was, because everyone's talking about how great he is, but what they should talk about is how broken he is and how easy it would have been to just not do what he's doing.
But we're putting like our sensibilities on the characters, right? Like
you have to though.
But like
to some extent,
you do to an extent. But like at the same time, it's like how can I put it?
The reason that he goes from being a character that has pathos because he's damaged, which can exist, and a self-destructive character would have been even more sympathetic, to someone who's just like
you didn't see him as self-destructive though.
He was self-destructive, but there was no. I didn't care. I wanted him to die because he's a douchebag and nobody calls him on it at all. No one, even his enemies, aren't like, "Okay, you're great, but buddy."
Well, I think the director was not presenting him as a douchebag. The director was presenting him as a tormented man, maybe like a. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that's what he was trying to present him as.
Right. There's like this machismo worship inherent in never questioning him or calling him out on his damage. That's not merely us imposing our values on him. That is a recognition that the validity of that value, that perspective that he's damaged, isn't addressed. And it's not addressed intentionally to romanticize that damage. And that's not good. That's why he's unappealing to me as a character.
Okay. I think there might also be a generational divide here, because like for me, I find that appealing. And maybe there might be like a difference in point of view.
We millennials are a sensitive bunch, and like the things I just said are such a millennial thing to say. They really are.
Well, so for
the
me,
language of my generation.
Like
so.
I kind of see that. And I'm like, it's not such a bad way to die. Do you know what I mean? Like that's sort of my reaction to it. It's like with Rocky. Do you know what I mean? Like Rocky, he gets crucified in the ring. Silver Rock gets crucified on the precipice of the mountain. Do you know what I mean? It's like
but I love Rocky. Rocky's so great.
But he's the same. But Rocky's the same guy. Rocky's a damaged boxer who ignores all of Adrian's concerns and destroys himself in the ring for his own pride. Do you know what I mean? Like in every single movie, he does this, right?
Right.
Except
it's
for
not
5.
as though Adrian isn't. Like, she's concerned about him. There is some pathos to it. People do tell him to throw in the towel because it's stupid what he's doing. So, like, we can sympathize with the character while we recognize that he is fundamentally screwing up. There's nothing like that for me for Silver Rock. And I don't know... There's nothing in the script or in any of the characterization or the actions or motivations that we saw in this movie that reveals to me that message was there anywhere.
Well, but what about the Cheng Pei-pei character who was kind of saying the Adrian type things about him having the duel with Han Tao and Golden Whip and saying like you guys never think of me, that kind of thing.
I don't know, like that to me seemed more like the screenwriter just making, like, again, reducing Golden Swallow to this plaintive, complaining female role instead of her actually.
She was. I'm kind of saying she's like filling the Adrian role with those lines.
Right, but Adrian wasn't just that. Like, she wasn't just a harridan who only thought about herself. Like, her concern actually sprung out of a more genuine place. And like to some extent, there's a nuance there that might be just lost in translation. I don't know though. Like the movie. Remember that? Like you were talking before we got into the podcast about that like poetry scene where he goes off into his own little world about poetry and how serious it is. And it's like, it's presented as almost like this religious thing for him. And certainly it is. But, like, there's no doubt from anyone in the movie about the validity of that extremely unhealthy monofocus.
Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
Well, I just, like, I'm fine with damaged characters, but I'm concerned whenever the damage is romanticized this way. Because it removes the pathos. It kills my ability to sympathize with them because... It's like saying we should look up to the people that aren't capable of being healthy humans because there's something better than us, and that message it hits me in a discordant way. It really does.
I don't think that's the purpose of the message. I think the point of romanticizing it is to let you feel it. Do you know what I mean? So that you can experience it. You're supposed to experience Silver Rock's crucifixion over the course of the movie. You're supposed to experience his angst, and so I think
I think the struggle would have been helpful with there. So I think we're hitting the same point there. With you need to be in his boots. You need to be Silver Rock.
You didn't. But I totally felt like I was in his boots. That's what I'm saying. Like the the scene with the poetry, that's where I feel like, oh my God, I understand this guy. This guy is suffering. Do you know what I mean? That poetry scene to me is, this guy is wasting himself away in these brothels. Like he literally lives in brothels. He doesn't have a home. He roams the land. He kills bad guys, and then he goes and he gets drunk and he sleeps in brothels, and he has the courtesan that he likes to see all the time. But he's clearly not content. Do you know what I mean? He's clearly got this pining for Golden Swallow, but it's almost like Golden Swallow represents something else that's unattainable to him. Do you know what I mean? This normality that he just can't arrive at. Do you know what I mean? Because he's just hell bent on killing. He's a killer. Do you know what I mean? And he's directing all of that rage at bad guys, but you don't get the sense that he's particularly concerned about any of the killing that he does. Do you know what I mean?
I have a complaint with that too, because like, okay, his family was killed in front of him, but like almost every Wuxia character has some element of tragedy in their backstory. What is the thing that pushed this guy over the edge into complete mania? And it's just in the script, it just seems like when they're talking about how like zealously he pursued training in his revenge, it just kind of consumed him. But it feels like there's like at this point in his life, there's not like an evil organization that's powerful that he has to go and rid the world of. So there's not really any heroism at the core of this. It really just is his mania. Like with Rocky, it was more about going the distance, proving to himself that despite his terrible socioeconomic status, like there was some inherent worth to him. Yeah. Like there was some unconquerable strength deep down. There's nothing like that informing the heart of Silver Rock. He is 100% the unhealthy parts. You know what I mean?
Isn't that in a way less romanticizing the unhealthy? Like Rocky, you can almost sort of make an argument for it's good to be like Rocky. It's harder to make an argument that it's good to be like Silver Rock, right? Because Rock.
That's the crux of my complaint, though, is that there is no reason to be like Silver Rock, and the movie seems to acknowledge that at the same time that it never criticizes him and holds all of his identity and values really high, to the point where when he dies, like Golden Swallow dedicates the rest of her life to standing by his grave. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, where it's like, no, you shouldn't be like him, but we are going to look up to and worship him. And no
yeah, but everybody's miserable. Like, nobody gets what they want at the end of that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like she's basically a widow before she's even married, right? And she's residing with the courtesan that was deeply in love with him and knew that he was in love with Golden Swallow. And then Han Tao, the whip guy, is like, well, I'm just going to give you my house and wander the world now because I was defeated by your boyfriend, right? Like, it's like, and the only person who gets any satisfaction is Silver Rock because he at least knows he's the supreme swordsman at the very end of the movie. But
like, that's never been his struggle, though.
No.
Like, there was never a point when he had to be the best, and like in a Rocky sense, he just wanted to kill motherfuckers. At the end of the day, that was what he was all about. He wanted to kill people, and he wanted Golden Swallow, his lady crush, to notice him and to admit her love, and then he got to die. I mean, like, even if it's maybe technically well structured, it's extremely unsatisfying to watch that.
But I mean, again, I think if you look at it from like the point of view of like what's like, it's the ending. I mean, I don't know what Chang Cheh's purpose was here. Chang Cheh definitely had an admiration for violence and bloodshed. I think that's not a controversial thing to say.
The parts when this movie is violent, it's really fun.
Yeah,
I will give it that. Like, because the heart cutout scene is one of my favorite ones.
So I think when you watch Chang Cheh movie, I mean, number one, like Chang Cheh's, I think his father was a warlord or something. So one thing to consider is just the guy is coming from a much different place. I mean, I don't know what that necessarily means. I just know he was a warlord. I don't know exactly the full extent of the warlordness there. But he's coming from my dad was a salesman. Do you know what I mean? Like I can't. Yeah, I don't think either of us can really appreciate it. My grandfather was a boxer. I can kind of get a sense of some of the stuff, but it's very alien to me, the world that Chang Cheh is trying to depict here. But
that might be more than just a Chinese cultural thing. It might just be that there's something extremely unusual about his vision.
Well, yeah, because King Hu, if you look at a lot of his movies, like if you watch Dragon Gate Inn, King Hu, just for people who don't know, he's the guy that directed the first movie that this is a sequel to. In Dragon Inn, he makes a character who is essentially a rebuttal to James Bond, because King Hu didn't like the idea that James Bond had a license to kill, and so he made a character that's sort of the opposite of James Bond in a way. Do you know what I mean? He's sort of a response to James Bond, and so, you know, it's not like every director in this genre adores violence or has an uncritical eye of violence, and not even Chang Cheh is uncritical of violence. Just that he fully embraces it as a medium in the, you know, like...
Yeah, I will say the embrace of the nature, like the brutal life-ending nature of violence actually makes this movie very sincere. And the points where it's like that are extremely entertaining. Really satisfying to watch. And you're right, he doesn't flinch away from... his critique of violence is in showing just how it completely ruins everything you're trying to do. No one's happy at the end of this movie. You know, orphans, dead, families destroyed, destinies cut short. That's a critique. You can't say it's anything but a critique of violence.
Well, this is where I'm not sure where Cheng Cheh comes from. Like, I don't know. I watch it, and that's my conclusion. I watch it, and I say, like, look at the aftermath. This is horrible, right? At the same time, there is that, it's not such a bad way to die reaction that you have to that finale.
Right, he died at the zenith of his capability.
And,
you know?
And he's adored. At the end of it, you know, the woman is at his gravesite adoring him, even in his death. So, you know, I feel like it's hard to really, and maybe it's above my pay grade to sort of get it.
I don't think so, but here's my take on that, the woman is adoring him at his gravesite thing. There's a psychology behind that, because when I was a lonesome and frustrated teenage guy, that was such an appealing notion to me, that people would, like, grieve at how great I was at my gravesite. Mm-hmm. Like, it's wanting the admiration without wanting to be able to make yourself vulnerable enough to do that emotional labor in response to them. There's a psychology behind it.
Well, Silver Rock is definitely not at all a man who's given to emotional labor. I think
this is true, but his refusal of it is spun as, like, stoic or noble, and it's not really spun as cowardly, which is what it really is.
Well, see,
and I think that's the element of the movie that, like, that's one of those things where I'm like, my brain is getting tricked there. I know what that is.
I find his stoicism a little bit admirable.
You're supposed to, though.
Yeah, but I think it's. I mean, I think it is like, I think, you know, like, I understand what you're saying. Like, obviously,
your stoicism is admirable.
He could have.
I can with that, but, like, refusing, like, the easiest thing, like just returning someone's affections or going down and talking to them instead of an elaborate murder spree, like, little things like that's a free lunch, man. That's not being stoic. At that point, it's being afraid of being able to showing your feelings to anyone. And there's a distinction between stoicism for a heroic stoicism, you know, where you're doing something like sacrificing your well-being or your health or your happiness for someone, and cowardly stoicism, which is, I can't admit to you how I feel because that would hurt my self-concept.
But what if it's just that he believes that's not what a man should do? Do you know what I mean?
I think that's true about him, and I wonder how much it's true about the person who wrote him.
But that's what I'm saying. Is it cowardly then if it's just, well, that's what he believes a man shouldn't do? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's not necessarily that it isn't, like, he might, like, part of him probably wants to tell her all these things, right? But maybe that's not the worldview that the character has.
Right, but how warped is that worldview to not be criticized and then also be romanticized, you know? Because we, as modern people, understand that's retarded. That's so stupid to do it that way. Don't be like that.
But we're coming from a much different time than the movie is set and then the movie was made, and from a very different place, right? And we're coming from a culture that fully embraces psychology, right? Like, we fully embrace talking about our feelings and all that, you know. I gotta say, like, you know, I don't like to get into this stuff that much, but I was not huge into feelings growing up. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was not the way. I wasn't.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, they just, like, that's not how I was raised either. So
same here. Like, this is all a vocabulary I've adopted in my adult life.
Okay.
Because I'm a father now, and, like, I've got to be able to talk to my kids about their feelings because Like me, my eldest son is on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
So if I don't like discuss feelings with a sophisticated language, I can't make it real to him. I can't help him deal with his feelings. So you and I actually have that in common, which because I didn't grow up with all the mushy feely stuff I'm talking about now.
Okay, so
my grandfather drove a truck and he was one of these hyper stoic individuals, but I have nothing but admiration for the man.
yes,
You know?
I think that's sort of what we're getting at here. Is like I feel like we're a slightly different generation. We're kind of in between, right? We're like both. I think both of our grandparents were very stoic and very similar to Silver Rock, right? And our parents were probably a little bit more, open minded. But we're before the generation that's like fully embraced the.
Because my mom was 64 was when she was born, and so like she kind of grew up in the 70s.
Okay.
And she like I'm from 86, and I think you're like one generation before me. I think
I'm 76, and my parents were born in the 40s.
Right, so we're both relatively close. Like you're in Gen X closer to the end, and I'm Gen Y very close to the beginning.
Okay.
So we've got there's some mesh there.
You're about my baby sister's age, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so that I can grok it from that, but what I'm getting at is, I think the sort of conflicted feelings that we're sort of discussing about this movie, it's kind of like, can you see? It's sort of like it's like watching a movie about World War II as a millennial and not understanding the mentality of the soldiers in World War II. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's, I feel like we kind of have to understand it to a degree on its own terms. And I also think there's, I don't know, it's a weird movie because you can, it's sort of like it's like it's not very critical of the violence, but at the same time there's a lot there that you can glean to be critical of. Do you know what I mean? It's like a,
this one's kind of a gem in that regard. I think though, if we separate our perspective generationally from the movie and we say, okay, what is the effect of the characters and decisions that were made regarding how they interact? You could still critique the movie in terms of Silver Rock being a Mary Sue, just because the other characters functionally are reduced and motivationally are reduced to orbit him, and that is a structural critique of the movie that I have. Like my bias is kind of what we're talking about as far as my reaction to his attitude and the kind of hero worship of that unhealthy degree of stoicism in my estimation. Okay, granted, that's subjective.
But that's fine. That's fine. I mean, we're having a discussion, to a degree, a debate about certain points. But I think it's safe to say a lot of people would watch this movie, and the term that would be used would probably be like toxic masculinity or something. Like people,
right? I'm not going that far.
No, you're not going. No, but you know what I mean. Like this movie could certainly be held up as an example of that, right? Like, wouldn't you say that that's?
Yeah, if you wanted to crucify a movie for what you'd call nowadays toxic masculinity, yeah, you'd hold up Silver Rock and be like, look, this guy needs to get in touch with his feminine side. He needs to talk about his feelings. He needs to help approach his problems in a more healthy way. And the fact that the movie worships that, okay, this is what we're talking about when we talk about toxic masculinity. I'm not going that far. I think that's that hyper-critical and hyper-modern judgment on things. It's not. It lacks a lot of nuance because it is so modern. So I'm not going to go that far. I don't want to invite
but you still definitely do not sympathize with the Silver Rock character. It sounds like for you, he's
like you've definitely given me more sympathy for him because you're right. He is a damaged character. So as far as like he can't bring himself further, he has to have the destructive, agonizing in that he does. Okay, there is some genuine sympathy there. But as far as motivation, as far as manifestation, I don't have much sympathy there. And as far as the way the movie works, I was displeased with the way it presented those facts about him. Because you can't sympathize for something that you're at the same time romanticizing.
Yeah.
You know, those are two different spices. They're too discordant.
Well, and he kind of has like a sneer the whole time. Like whenever he draws his sword, he gets this look like a grimace or something on his face that's, very masculine, but very sort of, I don't know. It's it kind of seems like he's throwing shade at Golden Swallow at times. Do you know what I mean? Like that's sort of how it feels. I can certainly see the reaction that you had to it, and I'm wondering, would you categorize him as an anti-hero?
Who? Anti-hero is a slippery term. I think so. Because, and that's that's more of a subjective reading of the movie. I think that if I were going to judge this movie without that subjectivity, if I were just going to like talk about what was his function in the movie and how does that line up with anti-hero or not, I would call him a tragic hero in a classic sense because he starts at a high place and he's reduced. It's almost a Greek tragedy. So functionally, no, he's almost a classic hero. I would consider him an anti-hero because his actions are all horrible and self-destructive. But I think that's more of that's a more subjective take on him than looking at it from a structural viewpoint.
Now, one thing I did want to ask about the structure, I kind of want to get into performances and stuff like that too, but what did you think of the finale? Because it has a climax, right? Like it has the duel, which should be the climax. But then after the duel, there's this whole battle that takes place between the wounded Silver Rock and the remnants of the Golden Dragon organization and the other sects.
So many Golden Dragons in this movie. Oh my god.
But like that to me felt like a, like do you remember the little model rockets that would go up and like you'd make the model rocket, it would shoot up in the air, and then at a certain point that little thing would get triggered and pop the lid off of the rocket. Yeah,
so it would explode and then zoom another rocket and that would explode.
Yeah, it felt like that.
Yeah. And much like one of those rockets, this is impressive in the way it pulls it off because that's hard to do, It's hard to structure a rocket such as that you get two satisfying bangs out of it, like a rocket and another rocket. This movie managed to do it. There's like we've done Chang Cheh before, haven't we? As a filmmaker, I feel like we've watched Chang Cheh.
One-Armed Swordsman. Did you ever do The Assassin with me?
I don't think I did I did One-Armed Swordsman. I don't think we did The Assassin.
So
though.
The Assassin, we should have watched The Assassin because I would be very curious about your reaction to it. But that is sort of that. This is like basically, I feel like Chang Cheh is covering the same ground he covered in The Assassin. It's a little bit more grounded in The Assassin. I don't think you'd hate the character quite as much, but it's a character played again by Jimmy Wang Yu. He's dressed almost the same. He's sort of an all-in-white type character, and he's supposed to assassinate this. I think it's a king or a some significant figure very early in Chinese history, and it's based on a historical event. But the character is all about how he basically just wants to die in a blaze of glory. That's what he wants to do. And there's even like a line he keeps repeating where he's like, I'm young and I have this hot blood in my chest and I need to do something great. You know what I mean? That's just like, that's just, and he gives up so much. There's a whole love story that's like, unlike the love story in this one, it's fully explored. And you see what he's giving up to meet this glorious end. I'd be very curious about your reaction to that movie. But the point...
I'll tell you that from description, it doesn't sound bad. I'm not saying there's no artistic merit in what happens in this movie. It's an important distinction to make that like you can recognize that it's not as though that's not a genuine sentiment.
No, but what I'm saying is...
validity,
I'm curious if the way it's handled in that movie would land differently. Because...
More skill would have fixed this a lot for me. Because for me, it's not so much that the character is self-destructive and terrible, or even that it's worshipped. For me, it's just that the rest of the movie has to revolve around it in this clumsy way. And I think that's really the biggest complaint is this entertaining to watch? Because I'm not really watching Wuxia movies to help redefine my life view and my views of gender morality. That's not really what I'm about, Like, I understand those things. They're talked about ad nauseum in my generation. But, like, I just don't want to be distracted from the kung fu.
I get it.
Right. That's going to be my simple complaint is, like, is this so clunky and unskillful that, like, I'm just rolling my eyes at it? And the attitude of the movie towards Silver Rock, I rolled my eye. Like you said, you step into Ed Wood territory, it's hard to go back.
Well, I think of the scenes where the violence gets... it's a tricky balance because he's he's using violence as like he's using blood like he would use paint on a canvas, right? Like that's sort of how he does things. And when you do that, I think if you have to take risks, and sometimes those risks don't pay off. Do you know what I mean? Because you got to show extreme
both in this movie. Because and get their hearts cut out has this wonderful cross cut where you see them get strapped down, then it switches to behind them, you see their chest, and when they're cutting their hearts out, you don't see the violence. What you see is their bodies jerking hideously, and this spray of very realistic blood flowing down the side. That's gut-wrenching. It's really impactful and dark, and I loved that. I was like, oh my god, that's gorgeous.
And you have two.
And then there's the goose scene.
You have two characters that kill themselves horrifically. One veers into comedy, but they kill themselves to prove their innocence. You know what I mean? There's like there's like a code that is emphasized throughout the movie. Do you know what I mean? There's like a code of conduct that keeps getting, and it's always emphasized with violence. Do you know what I mean? I think when you watch movies like this, one thing that's going to happen is you will see there'll be messages that you just don't agree with that you'll see a lot. Like a message that I don't like that I see a lot in especially the Kung Fu craze movies, even though I understand why it's there because of the context, is a very nationalistic message. You get a lot of nationalism in some of these films.
You do see that a bit.
Yeah. Now, I don't like it, but at the same time, if it's done well, I can admire it. Do you know what I mean? I can say, okay, it was done well. They made me feel something.
And you do have to do that to some extent. Like I'm doing with my attitude towards the character versus my analysis of the movie. Like, you have to think about it in terms of, why am I watching this movie? Yeah. It wasn't to reject nationalism, So if I see a pro-nationalist message in there, it's not going to murder my interest in the movie unless it does.
Yeah, I mean, the only time I get nervous about it is if I feel like I'm becoming a nationalist because I'm watching it. That's when I would get nervous. I haven't had that experience. I don't find nationalism an appealing ideology. So
I don't find a lot of persuasion in the message I get, at least in movies.
I feel like, especially when you're watching movies from other parts of the world, you're just going to see things that, like, you're just not, like,
Right. But a recognition of watching movies from other cultures is that they're going to be from other cultures, other values. And, like, I'm not sensitive about the different values that people on my own planet hold. Jeez.
But I think it's fair for us to have this discussion. Do you know what I mean? And, like, talk about our different reactions to the movie. What I like about stuff like this is it is kind of dirty. Do you know what I mean? It is kind of a dirty movie. Like it's not a message that my mom would want me to have absorbed as a child, right? This is the kind of film where if my mom walked into the room, she'd be like, "What the hell are you watching, Brendan?" Do you know what I mean?
I'm watching a death cult movie, Mom.
So it's not a wholesome film, but I like media that's not always wholesome, and so
right. That's important. By the way, the idea that the media you consume doesn't have to 100% agree with your ethics or morality, that's important. You need to be able to look at something that challenges you on its own merits and be able to talk about it and think about it. It's good to eat. It's good to eat food that doesn't agree with you sometimes.
Yeah.
It's good to watch something that you think, wow, how did they ever get this made? Like, I've got, like, tons of movies on my shelves that I have only because the first time I watched them, I hated them. So I watched them again, and I couldn't stop watching them. I've got stuff like David Lynch on there. I've got a few Jodorowsky, like Santa Sangria. I've got, like, all kind, like David Cronenberg and, like, the
I like David Cronenberg. I like, but I mean, I like him
too. But remember, the first time I saw The Fly, I was like 7 years old, and I was sneaking into the living room while my mom was watching it. I didn't know what I was getting into. So that movie basically scarred me when I was a kid, and now I own it and I watch it all the time.
I was like 10 when that came out, I think. I remember it came out in the theater, and I think I probably watched it on video. I doubt that I was able to get my parents to let me see it in the theater, but I remember seeing it right when it came out on video, and it was horrifying. It was definitely a horrifying movie. Do you know what I mean? It was a very terrifying film. Excellent example of body horror. But I loved it. I was thrilled by that movie. But I grew up in that period, so there were a lot of movies like that. We were watching like Friday the 13th, and
Yeah, I used to watch that when I was younger. My older siblings who were around your age, or not siblings, but cousins who were like siblings at the time, were around your age. So I got to see, the Mortal Kombat movie. I got to see Friday the 13th. I got to see Nightmare on Elm Street because they'd sneak them to me. We'd watch them together whenever they would come over and stay. So like that was my exposure to that stuff, and it taught me an important lesson when I was young, which is you've got to consume things that challenge you. The experience of that is really valuable.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I with this stuff, I feel like again, the message is pretty bizarre, Jamie. The message is pretty odd.
It is,
but I find something very charming about it, and I also find something about it, which is the Silver Rock character to me is sort of the embodiment of just what happens when you build your life on violence, right? Like that's like he's a martial hero. He's been training to kill, and he's now locked into sort of this killing lifestyle, and he's directing it at bad guys, but it's kind of obvious that it could easily be channeled towards innocent people if it in the wrong conditions, right? Like he's selective in who he kills, but he doesn't really have any compunction about it at all. So
yeah, remember the scene because later in the heart cutting scene, he kind of just wanders into that like hall where the golden dragon are and single-handedly kills everyone. Which, by the way, I did want to point out when I was watching that, I had two thoughts. Number one, this should be ridiculous clown shoes. Number two, it's not.
Yeah,
they did a good job of establishing how serious and brutal it was before they got to that point. And the last shot of him is him walking out with the thing burning behind him. And two people walk out behind him or run out behind him, and he cuts them down. Then he's kind of looking off in the distance, and two more people, stuntmen, who are on fire, run out screaming, and he doesn't even look to the side at all. Like, there's zero compassion, and he walks away. That's a great scene.
And also, I think it's important for us to acknowledge, Golden Swallow, the Cheng Pei-pei character, seems to agree with his worldview. Do you mean? Because Han Tao is the pacifist in the movie. Han Tao is the guy who doesn't want to kill anybody, and Han Tao is Golden Whip, the Lieh character. But he's kind of like a nobody. Do you know what I mean? He's kind of like the loser in the movie, right? And at one point, Golden Swallow says to him, "But some of these guys deserve to die, right? Like these guys didn't deserve to live." And so she's sort of rebuking his pacifism. So, if you're watching the movie, who would you rather be, Han Tao or Silver Rock? Do you know what I mean? Like it seems like the message is kind of clearly centered on Silver Rock's point of view, but I do think. I think it's a movie. It's weird because it's a movie that celebrates violence, but I feel like it also is kind of acknowledging this is the grim conclusion that the violent way of life leads to, right? Like, but you're supposed to accept it.
I understand that appeal. For me, and I think this is a 100% subjective and personal thing. I don't know if I could consider this like a really strong counter critique to the movie, but for me, I would have found that message enormously more compelling if it could have been martially or philosophically challenged by a character in the movie. Because as it was, we were only hearing one side of the story, really.
Yeah.
And it was not a happy side, but like you said, the pacifist, like he couldn't challenge it. His philosophy wasn't challenging to the death cult. His martial style wasn't challenging to him. Ultimately, he failed. Everything failed before Silver Rock.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a nihilistic view, and it won, and that's not satisfying for me to watch.
No, it was, and again, I think, and I guess the question is it celebrating it, or is it saying, look, this is just the reality? And I guess those would be two different things.
It would be, and I think it's valid. The movie doesn't seem to understand there's a valid counter-argument to nihilism, and I think maybe that's what really kind of rankles me at the core, like. Because I can critique it structurally, and I think I have valid critiques there, but it rankles me in the heart, too. It, like, pricks at me, and I think that's where it pricks at me. The movie doesn't seem to know that there's an argument against nihilism. It seems to think that the acceptance of nihilism is wisdom, and it's not. We know better.
Yeah, I think that again. I feel like the movie is how can I say this? I think you're right. I don't know if that the movie doesn't know or if it just doesn't care, but I guess it's the same thing either way.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, it cannot know that if it doesn't care, because nobody wants nihilism. Mm-hmm. People accept nihilism when they think that there's no other option. It's the whole drinking the sand argument.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I feel like what the movie is saying is more just that, like, this, like, again, I'm kind of leaning on the warlord thing, because that seems like I don't know, when I learned that about the director, that was just a very compelling.
Yeah, that's a peculiar little factoid. We need to dig into that.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about it. I'm sure people listening might be able to weigh in, but I feel like there's a degree of the movie is kind of just saying the world is really messed up. And Silver Rock is kind of like that whole line that he says, like, look, there were no heroes that stepped in when my family was slaughtered. That line kind of has a lot of weight to it. I feel like it's one of the few lines. I think
that's the critical line of the whole movie, because we don't get much more of his philosophy than that. Yeah. No hero stepped in to save my family. But here's the thing, he didn't really even become a hero. Because the definition of hero isn't someone who embraces nihilism and murder. And that's what he did. He was consumed by it.
But what he said was,
what an incredibly tragic movie this was.
He said that he vowed to destroy those kinds of people. So, ostensibly, he was trying to kill the kind of people that were responsible for his family's slaughter, right?
True. And I think actually this is kind of a modern critique of characters that have that kind of mentality, where they put the destruction of others instead of the creation of something worthwhile at the center of themselves. Again, though, whether you accept that as a truism of how you have to be anything close to a hero, or whether you just don't think that there's any other alternative to that, like, either way, that's where the movie really it offends my sensibilities. I want my movies to have not necessarily an optimism, but an understanding that that's an internalization of trauma and pain, not necessarily a deeper understanding of the true brutal nature of the world. I want to see a challenge to that, even if the challenge, like, even if I don't necessarily agree with the challenge, I want to see some other philosophy explored there. Okay. And this movie had a sort of a one note for that. Like, again, going back to it, the pacifist failed. It was almost like they were making a mockery of any kind of counter argument, which I think is.
The pacifist failed and his sword broke, right?
Yeah.
Not his sword, his whip broke. Like,
he even says that. He's like, what else is there to say? I fought you and completely failed, and I'm going to live my life in shame now.
And like, even. And he's also responsible for the death of Silver Rock. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
But it's like not a glorious responsibility. It's like, oh no, I accidentally hit you while you were attacking somebody else, and my whip broke in the process. And it's a hard whip, so it's very phallic. Do you know what I mean? It's like a very sort of.
But this was a scene in which he was emasculated.
Yeah, he was definitely, like, a lot of times I don't lend a lot of weight to that, because it's just, it's like, well, it's also a sword, because swords are shaped that way. But
sometimes a cigar is a cigar. Yeah. In this case, it was a Wang.
Yeah, it was definitely, he was definitely emasculated as a character. He can't even compete with a dead guy, right? He can't even compete with a dead guy. And he knows it. It's written all over his face.
Right, and that not only humiliates him, it humiliates his perspective and the people that make that argument. Yeah. That's why that's in that movie. It's almost impossible to read it another way.
Well, it's like it's mocking it. It's like it's mocking the pacifist worldview, right? Like, that's the... Mm-hmm. And so...
Right, in a lot of what you'd consider toxic masculinity movies, they have that happen. Like, that's a thing they do.
Well, what's interesting, too? Part of my draw to these kind of movies, my father was a pacifist. And so, like, the complete opposite of a warlord, I would assume. And so, as a kid, like, violent movies were not really allowed all that often in the household. So these had an appeal to me because they were sort of forbidden fruit. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I get you.
Yeah. And so So when I see a movie like this, it's like I totally side with the pacifist worldview, but at the same time, I delight in crossing that boundary in the movie. Do you know what I mean? It's delightful. Something, it's sort of it's delightful but safe because it's a film.
I mean, I understand the appeal. I was specifically forbidden from practicing any kind of role-playing game stuff when I was younger because my mother thought it was an evil cult. So guess what I grew up to do?
You became a role player. Yeah, exactly. The forbidden fruit is the most appealing fruit, and so
it is the succulent.
But so I don't know. I think we've explored this violent movie topic as far as we can go with it.
I think we've hit our limits on it. Yeah, the limits of our time constraint.
I wanted to say one other thing though about the performance. I really like Jimmy Wang Yu's theatrical grace that he has in the way that he sort of his sword strokes. They're these really dramatic, sort of twirling slashes and leaps, and there's like a flow and a rhythm to it that I really like. And
there's a lot to like in this movie.
Yeah, and I like. Is. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't have anything else to say to follow that up. I'm not gonna. There really is a lot of stuff, but like, I think we covered most of the good parts, didn't we?
No, I just about the performance. I just like I mean, obviously Cheng Pei-pei, but she doesn't get enough, airtime.
She's underutilized.
We're gonna watch Lady Hermit next, and you will see just how tremendous Cheng Pei-pei really is. When you see a movie like that, it will remove any doubt that you might have. They call her the Queen of Swords for a reason, and
it's a cool title.
Yeah, it's a very cool title, isn't it? And that's the movie that I think really captures her Queen of Swords. Persona the best.
Wow.
And it's a different director, so you're going to get to see 3 different directors, same actress. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of a nice sequence of films. But yeah, so getting into the whole gamification of this movie. So here's what I was thinking, and then we'll go with what you were thinking.
Sure.
I was thinking, what would be really fun is to make an adventure where the player characters are the bad guys in this movie. Because when you think about it, it's like you say, you kind of hate Silver Rock, right? Because he's so amazingly badass and terrifying and such an asshole to people that he's really kind of like a villain in some ways, right? So imagine
as a villain, he's interesting.
Yeah, so picture this. The player characters are members of one of the sects that are being slaughtered by Silver Rock just so he can attract the attention of a woman, right? And so the way that the adventure could be structured is you make this, it doesn't have to be Silver Rock. It could be, you could make Silver Rock, or you could make any number of other people, but a Silver Rock type character and his allies are at war with the player character's sect and their allies. And as the adventure unfolds, the more that the less how can I say this? The longer they take to handle Silver Rock, the more of their organization gets slaughtered until it's literally just the player characters to fend for themselves. I just like that idea as sort of a countdown of, eventually it's going to be whittled down to you, and you have to take on Silver Rock and Golden Swallow and Han Tao.
I don't know. That's pretty good. And I've actually been exploring that a lot as I've been finishing up the writing on Lone Wolf Fist. Because, like, content-wise, it's kind of hard to know exactly how to write that as part of your GM prep notes. Mm-hmm. But I think I've done a fairly decent job doing a riff off Justin Alexander's content nodes. Mm-hmm. Basically, the assumption of them is kind of like a hex or something like that, or a room in a dungeon. There's sort of a status quo. So when you go in there, it's not an orc standing by a chest. It is an orc who goes by that chest, 8-9 hours a day or whatever to guard it, or a couple people playing cards or whatever. There's a reason why it returns to how it's supposed to be. It's a status quo. And I realized when I was doing that I could also make it so that, because the players are on like they exist temporally in the world, like as they're going and doing stuff, it's changing. So the players have their own kind of like time scale, and they're working within the turns and the rounds and the days of the universe. I realized that if I had a room that didn't have like status quo content, it had more like dynamic content that was like moving from place to place, and I was tracking that I could actually make a world in which like every time some turn or whatever, some more chunk of turn changed, the players could make a move, and then this thing could kind of make a counter move against them. So that's how I would set that up. I think I would have like the silver rock kills everybody time scale, and then every time the players take a turn doing something, like his time scale moves up by one step. Okay, he burns down this tea house, he kills all the people in this thing, and that way it would actually be an element of the game. They could approach it only tactically, but like it would feel real to them because in a sense it is real. Like they do have an actual ticking clock with measurable like turns that it moves, and so time becomes a resource at that point, an actual resource that they can kind of quantify.
Yep.
So I like that a lot.
What I like about it too is it's sort of like a Friday the 13th type scenario. It's like a slasher type situation. Do you know what I mean? But it's a slasher situation where the characters might start to wonder, wait, are we the bad guys or are we the good guys? Do you know what I mean? Like maybe they don't know all the details of what caused the conflict. Do you know what I mean? And as everything unfolds, they might come to realize, oh wait, my organization has been, blaming children for stealing gooses so that it can steal property, and cutting open the bellies of innocent people, and just doing terrible things.
All these awful things that they're doing. That actually is kind of a neat thing to do too. The kind of reveal that, oh wait, we were trained by the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's not. I think it's reasonably well worn, but not cliche. So that's neat, and I think that making that an element of like the early game mystery could be really cool too, especially since you got both. You got the collision course with the super over-leveled boss that's killing all of your friends, and you got the dawning realization that your friends probably deserve to die, and are you gonna go down with them, or like what's gonna happen? Are you gonna be on the side of the crazy psycho hero? Especially if we approach Silver Rock in that context, from a modern perspective, and I think you could approach him critically, you could make it so that he doesn't necessarily, much like in the movie, have a very appealing philosophy for his heroism. He's almost incidentally doing the right thing, like you mentioned. So when they encounter him, if they encounter him in a non-combat circumstance and they get to talking with him, then like they might even further question their own motives. Like, okay, so we're the baddies, yes, but this guy isn't really a force of unambiguous good. He's basically just like the wrath of God, kind of. Like he's almost impersonal. It's like a force of nature that happens to be on the right side of the law.
Yeah, I think it would definitely not just be like, oh wait, we're literally working for Hitler or something. It would be more complicated. It's like, oh, we're bandits. We work for bandits who are really nasty. But there is that complexity with the hero. That's why I think it's a really great scenario. I think you could just literally rip the scenario and run it with the player characters having to contend with Silver Rock.
I do think, though, that we would run it with a more interesting philosophical nuance, because we'd realize at the end of the day that it was about a very human evil versus a very inhuman good, and that's fascinating to explore.
Yeah.
And the exploration of like player characters caught in the middle of that would be extremely fascinating, because like what would their decision be? I don't even know what my decision would be as a player. Yeah. I find myself in that critical scene where I'm confronted with the reality of both, and I'm like, well, do I stand up for the bad guys who have understandable human motivations, or do I side with the good guy who's doing the right thing but is like this emotional void?
Yeah.
He's destroying human life because he's damaged and evil and just twisted on the inside. Is there a good guy here? How do I resolve this? That's interesting. That puts the characters in a really interesting hot seat.
No, I think it would be a cool scenario. I think one of these old Shaw Brothers movies actually do pay great dividends in terms of gaming content. I think it's definitely worth checking these out. I really want to see your reaction to Lady Hermit.
I'm looking forward to it now. Well, I want to see more Cheng Pei-pei. That was one of the biggest disappointments of this movie, is that she was barely in it.
Yeah,
She had
that's definitely a disappointment. It's not again. I love the movie. I would give it a 5, but just in terms of how it handles Cheng Pei-pei, it just feels like a complete misuse of her talents, a complete misuse of the Golden Swallow character. It feels like there should have been another movie that was a proper sequel, because her character in Come Drink With Me was so wonderful, right? Like, it was a really good character.
Yeah. It's compelling and was like heroic without basically needing another character to prop up all of her motivations.
Yeah.
You know? I loved her so much in that movie. And even that one, I think you can level a reasonable critique at it, that it kind of hands the baton to the man character to be the real hero at the end. But, I don't know, she's in it, irrelevant, till like the very last scene. So, it's not as strong as like of a critique. In this movie, they just totally, they're like, nah, she's not important.
Yeah.
Movie's named after her.
And she does, I mean, she performs it to the hilt. She does everything that she's asked to do in the role. It's just that it just seems like what she was asked to do was not to play Golden Swallow as she was originally conceived, but to play a more feminine version of the character, right? Like, and so it just,
version, but like,
and there's nothing wrong with like a feminine character. Like, it's just that that's not what Golden Swallow was presented as. Because the one, like I said, the scenes where she was behaving in a feminine way were outrageous in contrast with what seemed to be her more natural demeanor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like character growth as much as it feels like just completely a rewrite of everything about the character, and that's unsatisfying.
Now, I did wonder. I did wonder about the backstory. Like, we know that she trained at the same school with this guy who was orphaned, right? So is she talking about the drunken cat character? Is that their master that she's talking about? Or is she talking about some earlier phase in her martial training before Come Drink With Me? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, there's no real mention of drunken cat in this movie. It seems like a weird oversight.
Well, see, what I've decided, and I know it's probably not what the director had in mind, but just for my own personal entertainment, my view is the master that they talk about is drunken cat. And the thing that clinches it for me is that he's an orphan, right? And we know that Drunken Cat was taking in orphans, right? That was his big thing. And so, because he had all those orphan children. So maybe Silver Rock is one of those kids that we see in Come Drink With Me, right? You know the kids that are following Drunken Cat around and singing?
Yeah, I see that. That makes him a lot more fun.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's actually kind of adorable.
Yeah, I think... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anything to humanize this character. Like, I'm desperate to make this character more relatable.
What we got to do is go back and look for the character with the scar on his forehead like that.
Oh man, that's wonderful. All right, is there anything else we can get out of this for a game? I'm struggling to think of anything. Like, you proposed 2 ideas. I haven't gotten any so far. I'm like, because it's just so much the Silver Rock movie, you know.
Well, I mean, I guess the thing that we could talk about is in the final scene, just how you handle that mechanically, because, you know, you have this character who's mortally wounded. He's dying, right? He's dying. And then he fights a whole battle with a bunch of, you know, disciples from the sect. So, you know, that seems like something that would really put a strain on most systems, because normally once you hit the dying point in any game...
Most games have a kind of a failure spiral where you're getting more more negatives to your stats as you're getting more wounded, or alternatively, they have like a binary thing. Like, when you hit 0 hit points, you drop. And so being mortally wounded doesn't translate well to either of those things. I actually lucked out with inheriting the imbalance system, or what they used to call it, chi imbalance system from Legend of the Wuwen, which it's more like a status effect. Like, when you get wounded, you get what is effectively a status effect that represents the wound, and it manifests either in a mechanical penalty or in the way you describe their actions. It's like a way that it kind of limits what you can do. So if your arm is like broken, you can't use it. And the in-game justification for that is that you have to compensate for it in one of 2 ways. You can either compensate for it by retaining the mobility of the arm and just kind of like redirecting all of your other abilities to kind of compensate for your injury, or you can just let it hang there dead at your side and use your full capabilities otherwise. And that actually manifests really nicely in a game as both a tactical element and as something that allows you to make those really hideous wounds that are on a character. I added to that there is something called deadly imbalances, which get worse every time that you take the easy route and just describe them with your actions. So, like, if you're going to... And this happens a lot in anime, too, which anime was a big influence for me, where, like, a character will get, like, shot in the chest, and they'll be coughing out blood, and they'll be fighting at their full potential, and then in a lull in the combat, they'll cough some blood out, and they just collapse and be, like, right an inch away from death. I really like that. And that mechanic is actually what I use as my answer to that question. So I do have an answer for that one. I just made it several years ago.
Well, I mean, that seems reasonable to me. Yeah, I did. What did I do in the game that I'm working on now? I wanted to model this, and so I made a martial style that you can take. It's like a whole style called like Enduring Spirit or something. And the idea is when you hit the point when you're dying, you would be able to continue. Do you know what I mean? You'd be able to continue fighting. So you could take that as a style in the game, and you could, if you wanted to make a character who was destined for this kind of a climax, that would be the martial style to take. And I think I even made one that was specifically sort of like you're gonna die. Like, you hit the point where you're gonna die, and nothing can stop you from dying, but you can keep fighting for the rest of the fight. Do you know what I mean? You get one last sort of moment of glory. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough. I think it's a tough thing to model because it kind of gets into territory that's, the character should be dead, right?
Right, because you don't want to remove the failure state from the combat, because at that point it's just, okay, you're going to roll dice until they die, and then you can stop rolling dice. And like Exalted 2nd Edition did that a little bit. I think it was the Berserker class, I want to say, from 3.0 or 3.5 did that. So in that's what happens. Like, when you actually look at the incentive mechanism of that, you do wind up with a Golden Swallow, or a Golden Swallow-esque scene where Silver Rock is clearly dead and still fighting.
Yep. But I think that's fair. That's reasonable, though, because you're just giving the player character one last moment of glory, but they're still dying, right? So it seems like a fair...
It's such a hard line to walk, though, because, like, if you make it so they can't lose on top of that, then why are you rolling dice? You just declare the outcome,
Well, they could still miss. Right?
Right, but that just means they have to take another action to kill the same guy because they're undying. And being undying versus being unfailing should be distinct things, in my estimate.
Yeah. No, and I think in mine, the way I did it was there was an endurance roll involved every round. So it wasn't technically... it wasn't like you were unlimited and you wouldn't die. It's just that you could go on considerably longer than a normal
Right, and you could have, like, some systems do, like, negative hit points with penalties or, like, something like that. I think that's probably a good way to do it, where, like, you have your I'm alive and fighting fine health, then you hit the, okay, I'm critically wounded and dying.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a game, Tenor Bancho Zero, which is an interesting mechanic called the Death Box mechanic that I stole wholesale from my game, because I'm creative. Anyway, the point of it is, like, whenever you take damage, you can either accept that it vanquishes you, or you can tick off a health box, and they actually give you bonuses as you tick them off, because they carry lasting consequences. The worst one is the death box, which you have to choose to tick. Nothing can kill you unless you tick that box, but it gives you the biggest bonuses. So it guarantees the scene in which you are dying, you will have a super cool send-off.
Okay, but you're dead. But you do.
You're dead at the end of that stuff.
But we're coming up on the time that I have to leave at, so
I get you. I think we've exhausted this one, though. I'm looking forward to Lady Hermit.
Yeah, Lady Hermit is going to be tremendous. Lady Hermit is a how can I say? Lady Hermit is. Well, I don't know. I don't want to taint your view of the movie, so I'm not going to say anything. But
look, anything to get the aftertaste of Silver Rock out of my mouth will be welcome.
Well. This one's directed by Ho Meng-hwa, and he's a very different director from Chang Cheh.
Good.
And so
good.
I want to see how you react to him. definitely a lot more subdued. Not nearly as enchanted with the kind of violent stuff that Chang Cheh is enchanted with. So yeah, we'll get into that, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussion. And next week, on Wuxia Weekend, we are supposed to be doing A Moment of Romance, which I'm really looking forward to. If we could find a way to get you to watch it, I'd love to have you on, because I'd be very curious about your reaction to A Moment of Romance.
A Moment of Romance, huh?
The title is very misleading. That's
very common.
It's got a romantic core to it, but it's bookended with really violent, heroic bloodshed stuff. So
if I can stream it, I'd be happy to. I don't mind paying a little bit for a stream. So
I have to see if it's. We had to get DVDs for Dion and Adam. I don't know what the situation is with but maybe it's available somewhere. We'll see if we can find it.
Well, it also might be available at like my local DVD store, because they have a martial arts section which has a really robust collection. So I'll check it out.
See if they got Moment of Romance. I'll send you over the details about the movie, just so that there's no, some other Moment of Romance movie or something. But yeah, so we'll be back on again. Go to the Patreon, support us. It helps us. If we had but one more patron, I could have ordered an additional. Oh,
I was rolling my finger for one.
Oh, okay. I thought you were telling me to shush for some reason.
No, that would have been like this.
Okay. But if we had one more patron, we could have got another DVD and sent it to Joel, and we wouldn't have this problem that we have right now. So
yes, people, don't think about your own financial well-being. Think about me.
So let's help Joel get some more DVDs, and so we'll be back on, and we'll talk to you later.